A 7-year-old girl walked into a courtroom, looked the judge in the eye, and said, "Let my dad go, and I'll make you walk." Everyone laughed, until the judge stood up for the first time in 10 years. Every head in the room turned as Judge Harold Whitaker rolled into the courtroom, his black robe draped neatly over the sides of his wheelchair. At 62, his face was stern, his eyes cold and sharp. The kind of man whose presence alone could silence a room. His legs had been paralyzed for 10 years, but his authority untouched. If anything, his inability to walk seemed to have made him even more unyielding. People whispered that he was merciless, especially toward men like the one sitting before him today. At the defendant's table sat Marcus Hayes, a black man in his late 30s. His hands were cuffed in front of him, and the faded peach color of his prison jumpsuit made him look even more worn down. He had been accused of obstruction, fraud, and resisting arrest. To the court, he was just another file in the stack, an open and shut case. To Judge Whitaker, a repeat offender. No remorse, no reason to show mercy. The prosecutor stood confidently. "Your Honor, the people recommend no less than 15 years. The defendant has wasted this court's time with false claims of being wrongly imprisoned. All evidence says otherwise." Marcus didn't speak. His public defender had stopped fighting hours ago. It was as if even his own lawyer had decided there was no point. The judge leaned forward, ready to deliver the sentence, and then it happened. The heavy doors at the back of the courtroom opened with a low creak. Small, soft footsteps echoed through the chamber. Everyone turned to look. A little girl, no older than 7, stepped into the room. She wore a light blue dress, her hair neatly tied into 2 braids. She walked alone, not holding anyone's hand, not looking scared. She just kept walking, past rows of strangers, past whispering lawyers, past the wide-eyed bailiffs who didn't dare stop her, until she was standing right in front of Judge Whitaker's bench. The judge frowned. "Who is this child?" he asked sharply. Before anyone could answer, the little girl looked him straight in the eye and said, "Let my daddy go, and I'll make you walk." The room exploded. Some laughed out loud. A few people smirked. Even one of the guards let out a small chuckle. The judge blinked. "What did you just say?" "I said, if you let him go," she repeated without fear. "I'll make you walk." Judge Whitaker shook his head. "This is not a place for fairy tales." "Bailiff, remove her." "Please," Marcus suddenly called out, his voice breaking. "Let her speak." "Sit down," the judge snapped. "This is highly irregular." The little girl didn't move. "I came because you're not listening," she said. "Nobody listens to my dad. They don't know who he really is." "And who is he?" the judge demanded. "He used to help people before you locked him up. He used to make them better." A few chuckles went through the room again. The judge's irritation grew. "Why is she even here?" he muttered. "She's his daughter," the bailiff answered awkwardly. "She walked in alone. We didn't know what to do." The judge sighed. "What's your name, child?" "Faith." The room went silent again. Judge Whitaker leaned forward. "Faith, I don't know what you think is going to happen here, but this is a courtroom, not. This is exactly where it needs to happen," she interrupted. "You've been sitting in that chair for 10 years, haven't you?" The judge stiffened. "That's not your concern. You couldn't feel your legs after the accident," Faith continued. "They told you your spine was broken, that you'd never walk again." His lips tightened. "Enough! But you want to walk." The judge gripped the wheels of his chair. Faith stepped closer. "I'm not here to scare you. I'm here to ask you something no one else will. Please, don't hurt my dad again. He didn't lie. You just didn't believe him." The judge looked toward Marcus. His jaw was clenched tight. Then Faith lifted her hand slowly, as if she were reaching for something invisible. "If you give him back to me," she whispered, I'll give something back to you." The judge was about to dismiss her again. But then, it happened. For the first time in a decade, he felt something. Not pain, not numbness, warmth. It was faint, but real, like sunlight on his knees. The room was still. Everyone was watching. The warmth spread, slowly, moving into his thighs. And then, without even thinking, Judge Whittaker pressed his palms against the arms of his wheelchair and began to rise. Gasps filled the air. Chairs scraped the floor. The prosecutor froze mid-breath. The judge was standing, shaking, unsteady, but standing. Faith's eyes softened. "Now please give me back my dad." The judge sat back down, his hands trembling. His mind was spinning. This was impossible. And yet, he had just stood for the first time in 10 years. Nobody in the courtroom was laughing anymore. The silence was heavy, almost sacred. The clerk leaned toward him and whispered, "Sir, what do we do now?" Judge Whittaker looked at Marcus's file on the bench. For the first time, he really looked. The charges, the so-called evidence, the statements, and right there, in black and white, he began to see the cracks. "Bring me the arresting officer's report," he ordered quietly. Within minutes, papers shuffled across the room. The prosecutor's confident expression started to fade. There were timeline gaps, witness statements that didn't match, details that looked manufactured. Piece by piece, the case began to crumble. The judge felt something deep in his chest, a mix of anger and guilt. How many times had he sentenced someone without digging deeper? How many lives had been crushed because he assumed he already knew the truth? Finally, he put the papers down. "Mr. Marcus Hayes," he said, his voice shaking slightly, "this court finds that the evidence presented against you is insufficient. All charges are hereby dropped. Your record will be cleared immediately. And," he swallowed hard, "this court owes you an apology." For a moment, Marcus just stared at him. Then Faith ran to her father, her tiny arms wrapping tightly around his neck. Marcus knelt to the floor, even with the cuffs still on. His shoulders shook as he buried his face in her hair. "You did it," he whispered. "You kept your promise." The judge's eyes stayed on them, almost afraid to look away. He found himself asking, How did she do that?" Marcus stood slowly, still holding Faith in his arms. "She didn't heal you," he said gently. "She reminded you that you could heal yourself." The judge shook his head. "That doesn't make sense." Marcus gave a faint smile. "It's not supposed to." For the first time in years, Judge Whittaker felt something he thought was long gone. Hope. "Bailiff," he said quietly, "remove his chains." The sound of the shackles hitting the floor echoed through the room. Marcus lifted Faith higher, kissing her cheek as tears slid down both their faces. They began walking toward the door, but before they reached it, the judge's voice called out again. "Faith!" She turned, her braids swaying gently. "Thank you." She smiled. "Now maybe you can believe again." The doors opened, and they stepped out into the light. Father and daughter, free at last.